On the 11th of December 1979, Taraki returned from a trip to Moscow. He was welcomed by his Prime Minister Amin, visibly very happy to see the president home again. 3 days later, the same Amin had Taraki suffocated by Secret Service officers. Amin seized power without giving Moscow any warning. He was henceforth at the helm of a country plunged in civil war. The purges that followed were brutal. Amin had all high-ranking officers loyal to Taraki either imprisoned or executed. It was at this point that the Soviets started to wonder who this Hafizullah Amin really was.
But, you know, horribly violent year.
Yeah.
Horribly violent year. And it's going to end with Operation Storm 333.
I said to Amin that his policies were too harsh, that they were turning the Muslim population against him, like the land reforms which did not take into account Afghan traditions. But he used to reply, "Did Stalin make the revolution in white gloves?"
He's in power for 3 months, and in these 3 months are when the worst massacres happen. I mean, if you look at all the dates, right, prior to September 79, I think there's more massacres between September and December than there are in the rest of the year.
Amin was the regime's strongman. In spite of the unrest, he was determined to drive on with the reforms. Amin launched a campaign of terror. He had opponents arrested and shot.
Hafizullah Amin is only in power for a very short period of time. So like you said, Operation Storm 33 comes in, they actually shoot him. And
also, he was poisoned beforehand.
Его пытались отравить, был внедрен повар. Тогда очень популярна была кола в Афганистане. У нас еще и не было, по-моему. Вот. Это такой достаточно ядовитый напиток, но уничтожает все, в том числе и яд. И те, кто запивали колой, вот, действие этого яда, ну, практически это там вышло на уровень отравления.
What I've heard is that, and this is contested, but what I've heard is that he woke up in his underpants and stumbled into the room and was like, "Who are you guys?" And they just like capped him.
Yeah, no. It gets funnier than that. He thought the Soviets were coming in to help him because he's facing rebellion. So the story is like
he doesn't realize they're the ones who poisoned him.
He comes out in his underwear to the bar, the bar in the presidential palace, and like he sees these like Russian troops, and they just shoot him. And it's just like a fitting end to an absolutely horrible human being. But
they moved him to this castle. Basically, it's it's like a mansion.
He had his own a bunch of his own private facilities that no one else in the country had access to. So that's 79. Then Barbara Karmal comes in.
Moscow replaced Amin with a more manageable leader, Babrak Karmal.
He's the main guy under which most of the civil war and stuff takes place. So he's brought in December 79 to November 86. So a good 7 years he's in power.
While more weapons poured into Afghanistan, the United Nations sought a diplomatic solution. Under-Secretary Diego Cordoves tried to broker a deal for the Soviet Union to withdraw if military aid to the Mujahideen was stopped. His shuttle diplomacy made little headway with Afghan President Babrak Karmal.
Here's the biggest thing, the Islamicization or the importation of the political Islam occurs during this war with the Soviets. Babrak Karmal, once he's brought into power, under him is when the Soviets actually, begin large-scale deployment in Afghanistan to help fight the rebels.
It's New Year 1980, and a Soviet army occupies a neighboring country. This was the limited contingent of Soviet forces in Afghanistan, the 40th Army, numbering 80,000 men now, but rising in time to 152,000, one-third the strength of United States forces at their peak in Vietnam. Over 2,000 armored fighting vehicles now began to make their presence felt on Afghanistan's few roads.
So the effectiveness of the rebel campaign against the Soviets and the Afghan government is sort of limited on account of the fact that they fight each other a lot of the time. They don't really have a basis for political unification. It's literally like each region and its leaders.
The most prominent of these Afghan groups were Hizb Islami, headed by Galbuddin Hekmatyar, and Jamaat Islami, founded by Burhanuddin Rabbani, and its military wing, the Northern Alliance, which was led by guerrilla commander Ahmad Shah Massoud. There were many divisions over religious and political ideas as well as ethnic background, but under pressure from Pakistan and Saudi, they formed a loose umbrella group called the Peshawar 7.
There's a common objective, which is, fighting off the communist regime, but even as early as, the beginning stages of the conflict, people are already thinking towards what is going to replace this, right? Fighting off the communists, that whole objective is, limited on account of people are fighting each other because they're thinking, once the communists go, I'm also going to have to fight this guy next. Let me start it now.
Because this revolution is an Islamic revolution, and it has its special aims and goals, which is to establish a pure Islamic system in Afghanistan, freedom of Afghanistan, and liberation of Afghanistan.
So that whole reality is existent, right? Where you have Tajiks fighting Pashtuns, you have different Pashtun tribes fighting each other while simultaneously fighting the Afghan regime. And this is really where Islamism and political Islam falls into it, where the different warring factions are able to unite on the common factor they all share, which is religion, right? Because we're all Muslims, so it doesn't matter if you're Tajik, Baluch, Uzbek, Pashtun, it doesn't really matter because you're all Sunni Muslim. So because of that, you have to work together to build an Islamic state or Islamic government.
理想のイスラム共和国、それはどういう国になるんでしょうか。
بله یک نمونه جامعه اسلامی در امو زمان امو جامعه بوده که پیغمبر خدا در وقت تشکیل داده بوده. حکومتی که اسلامی که ما میخوایم مدل زندهش فعلا در روی زمین وجود نداره به او شکل. هر کشور یک قسمتی از این مدل داره مگر مجموعی از این نداره.
And you have to overthrow the current communist government to establish that. So that becomes sort of the new objective, and that's really what begins to stop the infighting during the war. And the interesting thing is that this is actually imported to Afghanistan by, Abdullah Azam and Al-Maktab al-Khidamat.
A refugee from the Palestinian struggle against Israel, Azam believes religion and politics are completely intertwined. To Azam, most Palestinians are Muslims, and an attack on one Muslim is an attack on all. The rifle alone, no negotiations, no conferences, and no dialogue.
We have supported them in their effort to liberate their country from foreign domination and will continue that support as long as it's needed. As a free people, we can do no less, for their struggle is our struggle.
And then on top of that, you have, all these Salafist jihadis sent over from Saudi Arabia to Afghanistan, because you have to remember, this is post Grand Siege Grand Mosque siege. I think the interesting thing over here, right, if you want to look at the larger picture, is that Salafism, right, in general, nowadays, especially, it has two branches, right? Whereas you have on the one hand, you have very strong, like, jihadi, like Al-Qaeda kind of, yeah. And on the other side, you have a very, like, just whatever the king says is good, and just listen to the king, and just anti-rebellion, that whole branch.
Well, one of the things they say about Al-Qaeda is that if they're really Salafi, they wouldn't use guns.
Yeah, they use swords and ride camels, right?
They're hypocrites in their own standards.
I mean, not really. Not really. I mean, if you think that's a very funny point. But I mean, literally, obviously not. But that is very funny. Here's the thing, right? Okay, yeah, people don't realize that the border is practically open at this time. We can go back and forth because, so nowadays the two major check points at along the border are Torkham and you have Chaman border, right? These are two major points. Back then, you could cross anywhere, anytime. No one's going to check you. There's no such thing as IDs. You know, there's pictures of people crossing the border fully armed, just walking across. You know, like, hey, let me
I have videos of it.
Yeah, so that's how it is, and I think this is very interesting. I was reading this one journalist, like American journalist. He actually goes with the Mujahideen group from Peshawar into Afghanistan, and he keeps asking the guy, "Where does Afghanistan begin? Where does Afghanistan begin?" And the guy he's asking the question to doesn't understand what, like. So then eventually they get to like the strike area, and then the guy hits the ground and goes, "Afghanistan," and looks at him. So that distinction, at the time especially, isn't as strong as it is nowadays, because nowadays you have a closed border, you know, you have the visa system, you have all that. At that time, it doesn't exist. It's like literally going to another state or another county. There's no checks. It's an open border policy, especially Zia al-Haq pushes for that.
General Zia al-Haq, Pakistan's military ruler. Pakistan always had a keen interest in Afghanistan.
He pushes for as open border policy as you can get. They grant ID cards to however many refugees. They set up hospitals. They give the guns and the money to as many rebel groups as they can. So at this point is where you see the U.S. and Pakistan's role in the conflict, where they give the guns and the money to the groups which are...
The Islamic groups fighting the communists received covert American aid for the first time in July 1979. President Carter began by sending communications equipment. They favored the extremist Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
The Pakistanis then needed to have people that they could manipulate. It is for that reason that American aid, whatever it was, and in the early period it was minimal, later it became more significant, was essentially directed by the Pakistanis to Gulbuddin at the expense of other groups.
There you have Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
What, total dick, right?
Yeah. I mean, Masood doesn't get as bad of a rep, despite the fact they both did the same stuff. But yeah, total dick, if you ask a lot.
The arms were not distributed fairly. Despite our military successes, Pakistan only gave us 8 missiles. For 2 years, they cut all aid to my group. The Pakistanis had their own agenda. They gave the lion's share of weapons to the hardliner, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
He won 5% of the vote in the recent election, which shows you just how corrupt the entire political process there is. I mean, he bombed the city and still got 5% of the vote. So, I mean,
like we said, the Soviets were focused on controlling the cities and the roads, and the rural population was unaffected. So in 1982, the Soviets launched this campaign. It's basically a genocide campaign that they call From City to Village.
Throughout Afghanistan, Soviet aircraft were now bombing indiscriminately. They pummeled village after village into oblivion.
We'll hit this agenda from like a strategic viewpoint, because the stronghold of the rebellion is the rural population. It's ingrained into it. Holding the cities doesn't do any good in stopping the rebellion. So in order to crush it, you have to go to the source, which is the the rural areas, and you have to wipe them out. That's the only way you're going to stop the revolution.
One of the things that they would do is like, so if a garrison was attacked, the closest village would be the one that they're going to go burn.
But with launching methods as primitive as these, accuracy is as much a matter of luck as anything else. Even with their range of 8 kilometers, which allows the Mujahideen to make standoff attacks, the chance of scoring a direct hit on just about any target is remote.
1, 2, 3.
An Afghan Air Force Mi-8 attack helicopter arrives. Rather than confronting the Mujahideen, the helicopter strikes the easiest target available, a nearby village.
Yeah, exactly.
And like there's things where we have a lot of you know, some witness stuff and some not, but we have a lot of people who were basically burned alive. The Soviets would just throw grenades into family houses and things like that.
The Soviets destroyed the whole village. It's impossible to count how many they killed. The men were dragged out of their houses and sent off to the Afghan army. Those who refused were taken aside and gunned down, butchered.
2 Russian soldiers stood in front of us with machine guns. We began reciting the Holy Kalima from the Holy Quran because we knew we were about to die. They machine gunned every one of us. I fell. There was a pile of bodies all on top of me. The bullets missed me. The soldiers searched us and took our money. They moved me, but I just pretended to be dead.
But then also when they brought the tanks in, we also hear stories about the Afghans just taking grenades and rolling them down the barrels of tanks.
Yeah,
balls, dude.
Yeah,
that is fucking hardcore, dude.
I would take these stories with a pinch of salt. Like I used to work with this one guy. He was about 60 years old, and he was telling me this story about how when he was a kid, like the Soviets attacked his village, so like he climbed up a mountain and like shot like a RPG like into a helicopter. Like I'm not sure. Like those stories
only
exist.
Like 500 meters, aren't they? Like,
I mean, I don't know if I didn't believe it. I was just kind of like, okay, dude, whatever. But those stories exist, whether or not you want to believe them.
والیبال چې کوي توپو سره داسې عادي شوي وو لکه یو سړی چې والیبال کوي مونږ د توپو نه هېڅ نه وېرېږو مونږ یا د احساساتو سره لوړېږي د توپو سره توپو ډزې په مونږ نه وشي مونږ احساسات نور افرېږي.
They would call them ghosts. Oh, that's what's so cool about this period, the early period. Like it changes a little bit when you get to the 85 and Cyclone officially begins, but this early period is you have so many legends.
The tide began to turn against the Soviets. As stories of the Mujahideen spread across the Muslim world, invigorated by the passionate writings of Abdullah Zem, more people began to make the trek to Peshawar.
Yeah, they're literally taking on the biggest military in the world, the Soviet military, right? With Lee Enfields and black powder revolvers from the 19th century. I mean, like, it's more like, you know, balls and brains, as they would say. Like, there's not much strategic thinking going into this, but it's, I mean, you hear accounts of people, you know, attacking Soviet, you know, battalions and stuff with swords, and these all kind of just by any means necessary kind of approach.
Washington, say it to Charlie like that.
The resistance fighters disguised us as one of them.
Charlie. It's like Dallas, but in Washington. With Crystal and the Star and Roll. Yeah. You tell me when to watch. I'll make sure I'm home.
Would you take this seriously, please?
I am taking it seriously, hon, but can you all tell me something? What is Dan Rather wearing right now?
What?
Dan Rather. Well, what is he wearing?
You're watching TV?
Why hadn't he shaved?
Hey, who gives a damn?
Where did you get this? This is a real antique here. Could we sit it down and take a look? Sit it down and take a look. How long has he had this weapon?
2 months. It's about 2 months.
Does he know it's World War I?
Their forefathers used to fight with swords, and this is all they have.
Is this the only heavy automatic weapon that he has? Yeah, I
No, they only have the Kalashnikovs.
Yeah, that's a hand weapon. This is really heavy. Now, what is this over here?
This is new. They have just gotten it.
Is this the only mortar that he has?
No, that's all we have.
This is says it's a 72 millimeter Pakistani made, and these are the best weapons you have, huh? They only have about 20 rounds for this?
That's all. They have 20 rounds, yes.
Charlie, are we going to do business? Dan Rather. He's wearing a turban. Don't you want to know why?
He's doing a thing from India.
No, that's Afghanistan.
And they know that these are all old weapons, and they really aren't up to doing anything to the Russian weaponry that's around. But that's all they have, and this is why they want help. From the Afghan army.
Does he have ammunition for this? He has 3, but does he have ammunition? A lot of ammunition?
Well, he's talking about the Mujahideen.
We don't need anybody's soldiers here to help us, but we're being constantly accused that the Americans are helping us with weapons. What we need, actually, are the American weapons. We don't need or want American soldiers. We can do the fighting ourselves.
Or they say that if they get weapons from us or anyone else in the free world, they will win.